We've now reached the point in the growing season where we're heavy into maintenance mode, or as it may be, struggle to keep up mode. This is usually when I lose the battle against the weeds and the pests. Fortunately, we've got almost all of our first round of broccoli harvest done. So we've been eating it and blanching and freezing it. There's nothing more satisfying than finishing your last bit of frozen broccoli from the prior season, just as the fresh broccoli was getting ready, which worked out perfectly for us this year. So we've been enjoying that. The green beans are just starting to come online now. They're looking really good. So we're gonna be now blanching and freezing those, everything we don't eat, pretty much daily now until the end of the season. So when you have a garden and you're trying to raise enough food for your family, the chores never really end. And that's why once you get into this maintenance mode, when harvest is coming, the weeds are still growing, the pests are out here, it's hard to keep up. And usually the thing that wins out are the weeds and the pests, because I end up focusing on bringing in the harvest and storing it. So that we can enjoy fresh produce for longer, I am all about succession planting. So you can see we've got some more mature corn here. Then we've got a row of corn that's a lot younger. The idea being we'll start eating from here and then be able to switch over. It's the same thing with our green beans. Now I grow bush beans, and this first row is just starting to produce, and we're just starting to harvest from that. The next row over, much younger. So that'll come online about the time that the first row here is finishing up with its first round of blossoms and beans. And so then they'll kind of go back and forth row to row and continue producing beans until the end of the growing season. So it's a great way to make sure that you have a steady stream of fresh produce coming in, and anything that's not eaten gets blanched and frozen. The pest battle is largely waged around the squash and the cucumbers. The squash bugs are probably my biggest problem, followed by potato beetles, and really it's the leaf hoppers that do the most damage out on the potatoes. I find that the cabbage worms are an issue as the season goes on, but I plant my broccoli, get it started early inside, and as long as I can get my main heads harvested around the end of June or 4th of July or so, or that first week of July, usually I don't have too much damage or too many issues with the cabbage worms. We did have some this year when I was harvesting, but not like you do later in the season. So I always do short season varieties of broccoli that have early maturity and start them early to try and beat those pests. So the ritual as I walk by the squash here is scanning for eggs for the squash bugs. And here we have some, and I just try to rub those off. Sometimes I do a little damage to the leaves in the process, but better to get those off than have them hatch. So the issue here, the cucumber beetle is a pest. This is zucchini squash. They impact the zucchini as well as the cucumbers, and then the squash bugs are the other. So we'll find those all around here. Big thing I look for though is the eggs. If we can stop the reproduction, we can reduce that population. There's a pair of mating squash bugs right here. So we're gonna get those and squash them. No match for my boot. And let's see, a lot of times the eggs end up on the underside of the leaves. I don't see any there. Well, there's some under this one. Yep, there's a bunch actually. You rub those off. Some down here too. Unfortunately, we're already getting our first round of zucchini harvested. We're also starting to get cucumbers. So yeah, the plants are taking a hit now and gonna take a hit from the squash bugs, but at least we get that first round early harvest of fresh produce. Heading out to the potatoes now, and that's where I'm gonna spend my efforts this evening. It's been, well, quite frankly, too many days, although it's probably only been about 5, since I attacked the potato beetles by picking them off. So I really need to do that, because I noticed yesterday that we're in trouble. So as we look at these rows of potatoes, it looks like we have different levels of health, but actually we've got different varieties, and what we're really seeing is different resistance to the potato leaf hopper. Let me get up a little bit closer here. When we see these leaf tips looking kind of burnt like this, that's called hopper burn or leaf tip burn. And that's from the leaf hopper, which if we shake these plants, you end up seeing some little bugs kind of flutter around, and that's the leaf hopper. And when they suck on the plants, they inject a toxin that causes that to happen, and that leads to reduced yields almost right away. As you can see, the varieties in this row are a lot more susceptible than this one. So this is Eva, that's Sangri or Caribou Russet, I forget which at this end of the row, but Eva looks to be the most robust in terms of most resistant to that hopper burn. This is the Purple Viking, and then when I hop here, this is Kennebec, and those are really resistant to that leaf hopper as well. You just see a little bit of the yellowing on the tips of the leaves. Now these were planted some days, but not a lot later than the other plants, but those leaf hoppers would have arrived at about the same time because they're migratory. So Kennebec's holding up really well, and then these Caribou Russets and Sangries not holding up so well. Eva, I'm pretty impressed with. I've never grown that before. Now the leaf hoppers I'm not doing anything about, but here's the other problem, Colorado potato beetle. And these are Colorado potato beetle larvae, and we have quite a bit of infestation here. Look at how defoliated this is. The plants can tolerate about 10% defoliation when they're developing tubers like these are now. That's getting pretty close on some of these, so I have got to get these bugs out of here. There's a bunch here. Usually what I do is just walk down between two rows with a jar and kind of pull them off as I go. That's what I've got to do. I'm seeing a bunch on a couple rows here. So just need to get those things off before they ultimately go into the adult phase, lay more eggs, and we start this over again with another generation. It's always kind of a pleasant job. These things are kind of slimy. If you keep on top of it, it's not too bad, but this is a little rough with how many there are here. Sometimes they're hiding underneath, like this guy. Gotta watch for these little itty bitty ones too. It doesn't take long for them to grow into those larger larvae, and the larger larvae do the most damage. Yep, that is kind of nasty. That's my fingers after picking all these things. There's the haul. That's a lot of beetle larvae. You notice there's some leaves in there, and that's because sometimes when there's really small beetles that are recently hatched, it's just easier to take the leaf than it is to try and scrape off the actual larva. Because losing a leaf is not a huge deal compared to if those things get bigger and take many leaves. So based on that time-lapse footage, you can probably see that there were areas where I stopped and was working for a while. That's because the way these bug infestations work is that the adults lay eggs, and then when you have a batch of eggs hatch, all the larvae are going to be on that plant. So it's not every plant. There are spots through my potatoes where there's heavy pressure from the larvae, or a lot of them, and that's simply because that's where they hatched. What was surprising to me is that there were a lot more larvae in these kind of outer rows here right behind me, because this area was just plowed up this year. In contrast, you move over that way, the end row, there were no beetles in it at all, and that row overlaps where potatoes were planted last year. The reason I'm surprised is because the larvae actually go into the soil, and over the winter the larvae will metamorphose, and then they'll emerge as adults in the spring and then lay the eggs. So I would have anticipated where we had the plants the last year would have been where I would see more adults kind of laying eggs, because these things aren't the most mobile. They don't fly around. They're not agile like that. So the fact that there are actually more beetles in this latter row here tells me that maybe some of them came in with the seed potatoes that I ordered, which is a little bit discouraging, because now that they're here, it's a bigger population. It's going to be harder for me to control unless I do a more substantial rotation and move these potatoes 100 yards or so away from here to get away from that reemergence in the spring. But that's where we're at. We're now in maintenance and harvest mode for the duration. And I just got to try and keep up. I probably got to hit these plants again tomorrow or the day after if I want to keep on top of this bug population. We'll see if I'm actually able to do that.